Hello, it's Thursday morning. Garland Nixon here with Scott Ritter, and we got numerous things to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Scott Ritter. Man, it's been a great week. We had Andre. We always have a blast when we go on with Andre Martiano. That's always a lot of fun. And now we got Scott. All kinds of things going on here. Don't forget, everybody, go to scottritter.com. That's scottritter.com. That's where you'll find all of Scott's information, his good work, all the projects he's working on, all the plans he has for the future, at least those he can share with us anyway. I'm sure he has some great plans, that all kind of things he's always working on. And don't forget, it's critical for when the thing about online, and this is important, is that the people online are not making $30,000 a show like Rachel Maddow. They're oftentimes scrambling to make it. So go to scottritter.com. Make sure you share all of the stuff that he's doing on your social media platforms, because a lot of that stuff gets shadow banned and outright banned. And if you can afford it, make sure you donate. All right, let's get going. Scott, we'll start here. I'm hearing absurd rumblings from let's start with this. We got to start with this before we go anything. So there's this report that Zelensky asked for Tomahawk missiles. Have you seen that one? 2,400-mile range, boy, then he's really going to let the Ruskies have it. To me, that shows the deranged thought process that's going on in Kiev. What are they going to ask for next? Space stations, nuclear submarines? I mean, it's preposterous. Hey, can you give us a 40-megawatt plasma rifle? That one comes from the Terminator. Remember, he walks into the gun shop and says a 40-megawatt plasma rifle, and the guy says, "Just what you see on the shelf, pal." So anyway, we don't have a 40-megawatt plasma rifle, but what do you think about this? What's up with that? And that they would release that he would make these absurd requests.
I mean, on the one hand, it was curious at the end of the Second World War, an American psychologist was tasked with trying to get down to, how to define evil. What is the root essence of evil? And so he studied the Nazis that were, incarcerated and were going through the Nuremberg tribunal. And he said that the common denominator between all of them was their inability to empathize with fellow human beings, just total lack of empathy. And I've read this a long time ago, and I've always said, John F. Kennedy's great American University speech, you got to put yourself in the shoes of the other side, think at it from your perspective. So while I'm naturally inclined to just a knee-jerk reaction negative to everything Zelensky and everything Ukrainian government, and I think I'm right to do that, I do try to empathize because I don't want to be evil. And so I put myself in his shoes. And this war is 100% his fault. He could have stopped this war at any time, but through a combination of narcissism, hubris, ignorance, and just being placed under pressure by larger so-called friends, he continued this conflict. And it was a conflict he never, ever had a chance to win. No matter what, that Ukraine was going to lose this conflict because of the disparity of forces. And it's like me going into a boxing ring against a guy that has, greater reach, greater mobility, greater dexterity, greater punching power. And about 3 rounds into a 15-round fight, I say, hey, you need to bring in a fighter here who has, greater reach. but this isn't a fight between a fighter with greater reach, and it's a fight between you and him. You wanted this fight. You said you wanted this fight. Russia has the ability to strike Ukraine throughout the depth of its territory. There's not a place in Ukraine that cannot be struck by Russia. Now, Russia has shown great restraint in exercising this. This isn't a war. I'm just telling people straight up, having fought a war that included as part of it a strategic air campaign against Iraq, having participated in the targeting of Iraq and understanding why we strike certain places, I can tell you right now that Ukraine has not been subjected to a strategic air campaign. It simply has not. It's ludicrous to imply otherwise. Russia has carried out aspects of a strategic air campaign. We got workmen in the back, and they're doing their thing. And if the dogs don't shut up soon, we might have to pause so I can go shut them up. But and now they're all moving in that direction. This could either become quiet, which hopefully it is, or it will explode. But the point is, here you are over 2 years into this conflict, and Ukraine has lost. They're not going to win. And yet Zelensky feels obligated to come up with a victory plan, having been told. He's been given a script the whole time that says he's the Winston Churchill of Ukraine. He's the leader of the free world. Hell, everywhere he goes, he gets standing ovations, British Parliament, American Congress, European Parliament. He's treated, wined and dined and told that, Ukraine is the essential issue of our time. This is the battle for democracy over evil. And he's believing all this stuff. And so he's sitting there saying, I need to win. I need weapons that outclass the Russian weapons. That's what he's been asking for the whole time. Just give me the weapons that outclass the Russian weapons so that I can hurt Russia like Russia is hurting me. And the West is saying, well, that was never part of the equation. You were supposed to be the proxy that was going to bring harm to Russia, to wear Russia down, to try and get Russia to collapse from within. But you were never going to win this fight. We were never going to. There's no condition that we can accept, that we can tolerate, that would have you win this fight, because in order for you to win this fight, we have to assist you in the strategic defeat of Russia, a nuclear armed power that will kill all of us in the process. And the message never sunk in for Zelensky. And so here he is trying to come up with a plan, and it's logical. I have to say, if I were in his shoes, I would tell my so-called allies, I need to do to Russia what Russia's doing to me, in order to level the playing field. And I believe that because Russia doesn't want to engage in this is Zelensky's perspective, Russia doesn't want to engage in that level of fighting, that the potential to strike Russia in that nature would compel Russia to negotiate it into this war. So give me the weapons I need. And because this is an act of desperation, he literally is either doing a Google search or, reading something. He says, I want the Tomahawk, not knowing that America doesn't give the Tomahawk to anybody. I think the British may have a couple, but other than that, we don't dole it out to NATO. It's an American system. And he had a conversation at the White House where he put this out, and he thought it was in confidence, as it should be. To be honest, it should be. He's the president of Ukraine. Maybe he hasn't had an election, but he's the president. We treat him as such. We recognize him as such. He comes and he has an executive to executive level discussion. The next thing you know, he's reading about it in the New York Times in a mocking way, as if the United States is saying, what the hell is this guy thinking? So the empathy that comes out is, I almost feel sorry for him, because he's put in this impossible situation. He cannot win this war. He will not win this war. And yet he's told he can't quit. He's told he has to keep the fight up. He has to keep going. They're going to keep putting the IV in and dripping this military aid. And all that's happening is his army is being decimated. The Ukrainians just announced they're going to mobilize 160,000 additional troops. Where they're going to get them is another question. And how they're going to train them is another question. And what they're going to equip them with is another question. And then by the time all that happens, where the front lines will be is another question. But they're not talking about walking away from this conflict. They're not talking about finding an off ramp. They're talking about doubling down. 160,000 new pieces of fresh meat. They're going to be thrown into the meat grinder that Russia is 100% in control of. And I think maybe the thought process was, if we being the United States leak this information, that we will confront Zelensky with the absurdity of his views, and maybe that would compel him. And you see, I mean, the anger, the frustration, the exasperation that's in him. I mean, he's like, why would they do this? This was supposed to be a confidential conversation. Well, because it's the theater of the absurd now, Zelensky, and you are the tragic comic figure. You're no longer Winston Churchill. You're the bumbling idiot that is the world's looking at now and mocking, openly mocking. And he needs to recognize the reality of this new role he's playing, and maybe decide he doesn't want to play this role anymore. But the fact of the matter is, the support that Ukraine believes it needs to be able not only to continue this conflict, but to prevail in this conflict, isn't there, and it never will be there.
To me, it's like him finally realizing that the Biden team, they're just pimps, and you're nothing but a prostitute. You know what I mean? That's all it is. And the prostitute, they gets hooked on, they deliberately hook her on drugs, which may be an appropriate metaphor when it comes to him, but they get hooked on drugs. They, are they going to buy you some pretty clothes? Sure. They ain't buying you pretty clothes because they want you to look nice. They're buying you pretty clothes because they're making money. You are nothing but a means to an end. And at some point, when you're too strung out on drugs, and now you're getting a little older and you've gained weight, as they say, the bloom is off the rose, another potential moneymaker comes along. At some point, you've served your purpose. And he still thinks that he's the pretty young prostitute that he was when they first recruited him in, and that he's important to him. They got Israel now. They got other bigger fish to fry and other things going on. And he's still going there saying, look, I could make money for you. Buy me Gucci and buy me, Pierre Cardin, buy me all of this stuff, and I'll still attract it, and I'll still make money. And they're like, we got new things to do. You're getting kind of old. Move on. And at some point, maybe the Ukrainians at some point wake up and realize they were nothing but prostitutes. They were nothing but a means to an end. And when the pimp gets done with the prostitutes, throws them aside. Yeah, they can go to jail. They can go to a halfway house. They can get buried it doesn't matter. These people are going to, in the same way that that the neocons have no love or empathy for the Russians. Actually, I think they got even less for the Ukrainians. And for a guy like him, they probably even have less respect for him because he's willing to turn his own people over. At least the Russians will fight. You know what I mean? People, whenever they see somebody help them a means to an end, they always have less respect for the traitor that works for them than they actually do for their enemy. For the spy that turns on his own people, they respect that person. They respect the guy who says, you'll have to kill me, but I ain't talking. They'll respect that soldier. They have no respect for the guy that says, sure, just give me some money and some girls and some drugs, and I'll tell you anything I want about my own people.
Yeah, to use your analogy, he thinks he's Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman, that movie, and he's waiting for Richard Gere to come driving down in the stretched limo, to take her away from this life. But he's just a washed up old whore, is what he is, and doesn't excite us anymore, doesn't bring anything to the table, and there ain't enough lipstick and Gucci to wrap around this thing to make it attractive. And now we're going to get in all sorts of trouble for this analogy, but that's what it is. I mean, because he sold out. I mean, he had a price, and his price was met, and they used him. He played the role because prostitution's acting. You're supposed to, you're being paid to play a role.
Good point.
He's an actor. He was paid to play a role, and now they're tired of it. He's not believable in that role anymore. He's not useful. They want something new, and I mean, and the thing for Zelensky, though, there is no halfway house ending for him. There is no retirement. There's too much blood on this man's hands. And I don't see this ending well for him at all. And I think you see the look in his eyes. This is a man who realizes he's a cornered animal, and
he knows too much.
Pardon?
That's the other problem. And he knows too much. You know what I mean? You know how it is. Let me
tell you. He knows far too much. They're not going to let him write the book. He doesn't get to write Zelensky the memoir. And he is going to end up. My guess is, seeing how much he's bought into this, I think he's going to play the presidential role to the bitter end, and he's going to end up in a courtyard in some police station in a Kiev suburb, lined up against a wall and shot. That's his future. Or he's going to be in a vehicle trying to escape, and they're just going to riddle it full of holes. For the sake of his family, get the hell out of Ukraine right now while you can. Find a villa and try to live a quiet life. But the idea that this is Zelensky brand is something that the world, they keep Navalny's widow out there on because she's totally harmless. The Russians don't care about her at all. They don't feel threatened about her. Also, the West trots her out there and they interview her, and she says things, and nobody cares. So she's safe. But Leon Trotsky, on the other hand, we saw what happened to him. He fled, went to Mexico, continued to write, and because there was, if you study the history of the creation of the Soviet Union, you'll know that there were competing factions within the Bolshevik Party, within the Mensheviks and such. And he had continued sway in certain areas, and they put an ice pick in his head because they couldn't let him live. They couldn't let him continue to go on as this symbol. Zelensky won't live. I'm afraid to say it. He is literally a dead man walking. And what is
they can't, Scott, I'll throw this in. They can't have this guy running around after it's all over when someone says, so tell me what happened. Well, Jake Sullivan came to Kiev, and remember this happened? Well, that was a lie. He told me this. And Burns, and you know what? I got a call from so-and-so, and they said, say this, but what we're really, they can't have this guy doing that. That Scott, he never realized that ain't the way it works.
Why do you think there's MI6 bodyguards surrounding him?
Exactly.
It ain't to protect him. It's to make sure that when the moment comes, they know where every document is, every recording is, every shred of evidence is, and that this gets packed up and is never to see the light. We will not, I believe, learn the truth about what happened in the inner sanctum of Ukraine, because everybody around him will be dead too.
Yeah,
I mean, Arestovich is out there speaking, but he was, even though he speaks as an insider, he was never really an insider's insider. He wasn't at the right hand. He was on the periphery. But the guys, Yermak, you think Yermak's going to get to write his memoir? You think Bunov is going to get to write his memoir? These are all dead men. These are dead men because the scope and scale of the corruption that's at play here. That's the one thing the West really doesn't want to have to acknowledge, is just all this money we put in. It's not that the Ukrainians were corrupt. I think the West is willing to accept that because we know that. It's that we knew they were corrupt and we fed the corruption, that we factored into the sustainment plan, the reality that 40, 50, 60% of the money we put in there wasn't going to where it needed to be. It was going into other places. And a lot of that, and that's why they aren't going to let this be investigated, a lot of that gets cycled back to us.
Intelligence,
it is money laundering, it is corruption, it is,
it was believe me, they don't want anybody to start looking into that illegal crypto thing with the guy Sam Bankman-Fried dude, because all kind of dark intelligence money was going through that. You name it, they can't afford that. So at any rate,
and the drugs. Well, just to finish this, the drugs, the sex trafficking, the organ trafficking. I mean, literally the worst things that you can think about humanity is taking place in Ukraine today. The worst things about humanity is taking place in Ukraine, and we know it. We know this is happening. We know who is doing it, and we're not doing anything to stop it because we've bought into this Zelensky machine. The Zelensky machine is a criminal enterprise of the worst sort. The mayor of Ukraine,
Yeah.
there's reports coming out now about his role in sex trafficking. You know, he literally lives in a building above 2 brothels that he runs. He uses the brothels to take in the widows and the, daughters of service members who have died. And then he ends up using them in Ukraine as sex workers, or he sends them off to Europe, where they disappear into this underworld. I mean, if I'm Hollywood is Hollywood, but Liam Neeson did a movie, Taken.
Yep.
And that's real, people.
Yes,
that's real, and it's happening, and we're funding it, and we know this is why none of this will be allowed to come out in the open. And the American government's fingers are deep in this. I mean, someday I'd love to see Tony Blinken and Anthony
Jake
Blinken
Sullivan,
and Lloyd Austin and Jake Sullivan testify not before Congress, but before a grand jury because in Congress you can still lie, and you do lie, before a grand jury, and admit what they knew, and when they knew it, and what they did about it, and how they covered it up. And they'll claim national security. There are things we had to do in the interest of national security, this, that, and the other thing. You don't cover up sex trafficking. You don't cover up, child sex slavery. You don't cover up drug trafficking. They've been covering up forever. Organ trafficking. This sort of thing. We treat the Ukrainians literally as meat, and we move them around as a commodity, not human beings. Remember that thing called empathy? The United States of America, the government, has lost all empathy for the Ukrainian people, and therefore that makes us evil.
Let's talk about what's happening on the front lines now. We've been, for the last couple of years, everybody's trying to figure out, when and what, and as you've said for a lot, we started off with various times, but now it's obvious that the Russians seem to have their own timeline, and there are times they could move faster, and you're like, gee, why are they moving? So it seems like it's kind of their timeline there, almost like a war of attrition. Like, slow is the way they do it. Even if they can move faster, they don't want to move faster. This is what they do. Seledovo, Toast. I mean, major hubs for transportation, moving of goods, etc. It seems to me that the Donbass region, I mean, of course, we don't have timelines. It seems like I don't know how the Ukrainian military is even able to defend it now. Your thoughts on what's happening, regarding the contact line and what seems to be a kind of a slow motion collapse. I'll put it this way, a controlled kind of demolition. It's the building 7 of war. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you went there.
Yeah, there we go. I thought that was a good joke. But anyway,
There's a Russian journalist that I follow a number of them, but one in particular, Murat Khairulin. He has a fantastic Substack. I recommend everybody subscribe to it. It's published in English. This is a guy who's on the front lines. He has great contacts. And when I say on the front lines, he's on the front lines. I mean, this is one of the braver people you'll ever meet in your life. And his graphics are done by a military cartographer. They're so good that the Russian army came to him and said, "You got to dumb it down a little bit, guys." Because, you're sort of giving away the farm here. We don't want you to do that. But they're very good graphics, and he describes what's going on. And I've spoken with him, and we correspond. There's Murat Khairulin Substack. If you guys are looking for a way to get a war update every morning, in 30 minutes or less, read his read his reporting. It's very valuable, spot on stuff. But he, you know, the Russians, when we say the Russians are in control of the war, what it means is that virtually every battle that's fought is being fought in a way that's designed to maximize Ukrainian casualties and minimize Russian casualties. Now, things go bad. There's no doubt about that. There's bad commanders. I mean, I think we're finding out that, you know, the Russian army, you know, 2.5 years into a brutal war, a very brutal war. If you don't, you know, it's with any organization. If you don't supervise, if you don't rotate out, if you don't do sanity checks, and you just let people in, you know, exist in an environment where life is cheap, life becomes meaningless. You know, there are Russian commanders who perform poorly. There are Russian commanders who have become so inured to death that they stop doing the detailed planning necessary to minimize casualties on their part, and they get lazy and cruel and indifferent, and criminally so. And so, you know, there are examples out there of just bad Russian leadership that leads to disastrous consequences for the men that they lead. But these are isolated incidents. By and large, the Russian military is very professional, and their way of fighting, you know, they call it operational control. But, you know, when I was in the Marines, I had a Marine infantry battalion commander once tell me, you know, what does my battalion intelligence officer do for me? The best intelligence I get comes from the tip of my bayonet, meaning that, you know, I only need to know what's right in front of me. I don't need to know what's going on beyond the hill, because I'm just here to close with and destroy. But now with communications and with drones, the Russians are systemically reducing Ukrainian defensive positions. When they assault with very specialized assault troops that are being directed forward as they go. The enemy is known, the enemy is located. They're being told where the enemy is. If the enemy repositions, they're being told that they're repositioning, and they are given instructions on how to maneuver close. It doesn't mean that there's no courage here. Always the final moments of the assault is, you know, it's mano a mano, and, you know, the Russians do take casualties. But, you know, Murat says there's times now, you know, there was times during the Battle of Avdiivka where they were taking unbelievable casualties. He says we don't take those kind of casualties anymore. We have wounded, but there's days where we will achieve major objectives and not lose a single person killed because of the way we are fighting this battle. Now, the Ukrainians, there was a period where they were flooding the war with drones, and these drones were a nightmare. I have two very good friends that were supplying the frontline region, and they saw the drone, and they had their shotguns, they had their rifles, they're trying to shoot the drone down, and at the end of the day, the drone got them, didn't kill them, but wounded them pretty severely too. That's just the reality. I mean, these drones are, once you're in your sight, I mean, everybody's seen the videos. It's over, literally. If you can't kill the drone is going to kill you. And the Ukrainians were flooding the war zone with this, and it was causing the Russians very big problems. Not enough to stop the war, but, you know, problems the Russians. But the Russians, one of the great strengths of the Russian military is its ability to adapt. Drones are a weapon system. That means that the system needs to function in certain ways. There's communications involved. There's tactics involved. You have to be located in certain areas. You know, when I was in the artillery, you know, I worked very hard to come up with counter battery tactics and operations and the tools of the trade. And we used everything. I mean, you know, from a simple crater analysis. You fire at me, I run out with my lance corporal. We stick a stick in the ground. We shoot the azimuth. We measure the angle. Then we run back and we plot it, and we get 3 of them, we can trisect where you're at and get a general location. We put out sensors to listen to the sound, and then the sensors we'd measure. We got good at determining how far away and what direction. So you'd fire a shell, the acoustic sensors would collect that, and then again triangulate in on the target. We got radars out there that are collecting the stuff coming in, and all of this came together so that we could. Our job was to be able to, if you shot at us, we'll kill you before you can move. That was the goal. You shoot at us, I will have counter battery fire on you before you're done, before you can displace and kill you. That was the goal. That's the objective. And the Russians and Ukrainians have been engaged in this counter battery warfare for a long time. Both sides do it very well. The way they fight artillery now is completely different from what it was done in World War II and all that. Drones, the same thing. The Ukrainians brought in a lot of drone units, and they were just throwing drones out as expendable munitions. The Russians have broken the code. The Russians have figured out the Ukrainian tactics. One of the things you do in war is you template the battle. You look at the terrain, you look at capabilities, you look at goals, objectives, and you'll do what's called the intelligence preparation of the battlefield. You'll basically just start templating out the battlefield, where the lines of communication are, where the areas of terrain are masked in terms of observation and indirect fire. You look at the blind spots and all of this, and then you factor it in tactically how the enemy would perform, where they would perform, what they need to do, and you can begin to see what your fire support plan should look like. Well, the Russians have done this with the drones. They've figured out the communications, how the drones communicate, where the enemy needs to be, and then they put in their counter drone program. The most dangerous job in Ukraine today is drone operator. If you're operating a drone on the front line, you're going to die. That's just the reality. The Russians are going to kill you. You are the most hated person out there. The Russians will have no mercy with you. There's some stories of atrocities taking place where the Russians captured a drone unit that was very, there's always a backstory, and people say, well, why would the Russians shoot these prisoners of war? Well, that was the unit where, all the videos you have of Russians, crossing themselves and surrendering and say, hey, I'm wounded, don't kill me, but the drone comes in and kills them anyway. That was the unit that was doing it and bragging about it and publishing the videos. And the Russians collect everything, and they got these guys, they identified who they were, they saw the videos on their phones, and they killed them. I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying, if you're a drone operator on the Ukrainian side, you're, from the Russian perspective, you're lower. The Russians, to show you how they kill Ukrainians all the time. If a Ukrainian surrenders, puts his hands up and says, I surrender, the Russians will take a drone to him, deliver water, deliver medicine, and then have that drone guide the Ukrainian to the Russian lines where that Ukrainian can be processed and surrendered. That's the Russian way of doing business right now. They don't always do it, but if you're surrendering, the Russians aren't going to be killing you. The Ukrainians are killing everything, every Russian they can get. And as a result, the Russians just despise these people. The most dangerous job right now is drone operator. You have a life expectancy that is and the Russians are getting you everywhere, not just on the front line. Remember the academy they blew up a while back? That was a drone school. They were just getting ready to graduate a whole bunch of people who had been trained in the latest drone technology and tactics, and these people were supposed to go down and populate these drone units and bring with them this capability. They're gone. The Russians are killing Ukraine's drone capability, and with it goes Ukraine's last chance of imposing their will on the battlefield. And we see that right now. The Russians are just basically every day, they're just boom, outflanking. It's very smart, intelligent warfare what Russia's doing right now. They're not rushing into ambushes. They're not allowing the Ukrainians to take them by surprise. Everything is just deliberate, and the Ukrainians don't have a counter to it. They're on a chessboard where they don't get any moves. The Russians get all the moves, and they just have to lose their piece or retreat. The chessboard just keeps transporting itself backwards, and the Ukrainians just keep going backwards and backwards because they have no other options. This is what we were talking about is the total collapse. And at some point in time, Ukraine's going to reach the point where there's nothing left to go back with. This battle you talked about, the battle of you named a town, begins with an S.
Oh, Salidovo.
Salidovo. There was, the Ukrainians put their best brigades in there, their best brigades. And we're talking a significant number. Somebody was talking up of 12 brigades of Ukrainian troops there, including the Presidential Guard and the Azov, who served as the stiffener forces, the ones behind that shoot the Ukrainians when they retreat. But the best mechanized brigades in a Ukrainian brigade, these big name brigades, they'll have, brigade is normally 3 to 5 maneuver battalions. These will have up to 7 maneuver battalions, including multiple armor battalions. These will have a large number of dedicated drone support. So these are really division-sized units. And so they have 4 or 5 of these super brigades that are there in this battle, other brigades, and it's not enough. One of the reasons is that these brigades exist only on paper anymore. So these brigades are thrown into the fight, and it's like that map scene in the movie Downfall, where Hitler and his generals are sitting there moving imaginary forces on a map. So you're moving. You go, we've got the 57th Madura Brigade or 37th. We're going to move it here and move it here. Let's take the 3rd Battalion, put it up here. So we go, well, the 3rd Battalion, they were wiped out 2 days ago in that fighting over here by the river crossing. The 2nd Battalion's down to 52 men. Not even a company, reinforced platoon, and they have no transport. The 1st Battalion we lost contact with a long time ago. We have no clue what's happening here. And so you're moving imaginary forces. There's nothing there. And this is where the Ukrainians are right now. They're moving imaginary forces. There's nothing left. And you're seeing the rapid collapse. Now, the Russians aren't going to rush pell-mell in because the Ukrainians still have artillery. They still have drones. To do this counter drone fire, just like doing counter battery fire, it's a very detailed plan. You don't win by, rushing in and acting haphazard. You win through detailed planning with every move thought out, the support plan in there, every contingency put out. This is why the Russians are winning, because they're hitting the Ukrainians not only with superior forces, but superior planning, superior tactics, superior operational capabilities. The Ukrainians are very brave. Marat, Aptial Adonov has said this too. We expected them to surrender. I mean, under normal circumstances, the situation we've put these Ukrainians in, you would expect them to surrender. They're fighting to the death. And this is what is shocking the Russians, because at this point, dying doesn't accomplish anything but dying, but the Ukrainians are fighting to the death. There's people, they just don't understand the concept of, Ruki Verk and mass surrender. And so these are very difficult fights. And if you're fighting somebody that's going to fight to the death, that means you have to be very careful that you don't give them the opportunity to kill you. The Russians aren't willing to take these casualties that the Ukrainians are. And so the fighting is very slow, very deliberate, but it's also very one-sided. At the end of the day, you'll have battles where the Ukrainians are going to lose 200, 300, 400 guys, and the Russians will suffer no dead and maybe 50 wounded. And this is the kind of battle that's taking place up and down the entire line of contact.
Here's something I just saw that just plopped up, and I think in light of recent events, let's take a look at this. All right, new Russia-Iran deal to focus on defense issues, right? So what do we got here? An updated partnership agreement between Russia and Iran is set to be signed soon, with a particular focus on defense matters. It will confirm the parties' desire for closer cooperation in the field of defense and interaction in the interest of peace and security at the regional and the global level. I think that's interesting, regional and global level. During the BRICS summit, President Putin announced the imminent signing of the treaty at a meeting with his Iranian counterpart. The document will be signed during a separate visit of the Iranian president to Russia. And why I think that is of consequence is because everybody's still, people are still trying to figure out, the Israel, what appears to be attempted attack on Iran recently, just how much Russia was involved as far as defensive capabilities. Everybody knows they made no secret that they were involved, but the question is how much it was Iranian. I tend to think that both Russia and Iran want to minimize Russia's input for both geopolitical reasons and to make people understand that Iran is not a punk. Iran is not a pushover, that even if Russia doesn't help them, they can stand up for themselves. But your thoughts on the way things have gone recently, where Russia kind of made it clear, look, this is our guys, we're going to work with them, and we're helping them with their defensive capabilities. The Israeli thing that people are trying to sort out, no matter how much you sort it out, somewhere in that it comes out that Israel was, at least to some degree, thwarted by superior technology and or superior technological moves, that Russia was involved. And now Russia comes out and says, yep, we're going to sign a deal with Iran for both regional and global security. I think that's of consequence. What do you make of that, Scott Ritter?
Yeah, one of the more interesting people right now on the internet is Alistair Cook.
Yeah.
Alistair is a former British intelligence officer with extensive experience in the region. He was in the middle of the Palestinian-Israeli issues. He has contacts on all sides, the kind of contacts that you only get when you're a very experienced MI6 officer. And so he is saying that from his Israeli sources, the Israeli attack literally ended almost before it began. That the Israeli aircraft, including the advanced F-35s, were realizing early on that the Iranians were tracking them, were locked in on them with an unidentified radar, a weapon system that the Israelis were not aware of. Now, the Israelis are aware of the S-400. The Russians have deployed the S-400 into Syria, and so the Israelis have collected things of that nature. This implies an Iranian capability, an indigenous capability. When we speak of Russian-Iranian cooperation, let's again look at things. Why did the United States object so much to providing the F-35 fighter to Turkey? The main reason is because Turkey had the S-400 system, and that what they didn't want is a situation where the Turkish Air Force was collecting data on the performance characteristics of the F-35 using S-400 radar, because basically you're now able to develop, methodologies, do some analysis, develop tactics that nullify whatever advantages the F-35 has in terms of its stealth-related technologies. But again, this is why I keep telling people that American government today is dumber than dirt. Look, I'm not in the intelligence business anymore. Don't want to be. But I used to do it, and I used to be pretty good at it. One of the things that intelligence agencies do is they get involved in the military attaché system. And it's sort of approved. It's not, you can't really call it spying. It's approved intelligence collection. So basically, if I'm a attaché in Moscow, I go to parties. There's receptions everywhere, and you put on your uniform and you put on your medals and you strut around the party and you talk to people. That's your job. And then you come back out of the party and you write intelligence information reports. And sometimes you're directed, go to this party, meet this person, find out what's going on here. Now, I'm not directed to do anything, but I've gone to the Russian embassy several times, and I have very good relations with the Russian military attaché. Not from an intelligence standpoint, they're just really good guys. I mean, they're just fun to talk to, and my background and such. But things lead to things. And I will tell you, on at least 3 occasions, I've been sitting there in a conversation that I'm a participant in between Russian air defense officers, Turkish Air Force officers who are F-35 specialists, and we're discussing things that, had I recorded them and reported them, I'd be on my way to getting a nice little gong at the end of the tour, because they'd say, well, you did a hell of a good job here doing your non-spying intelligence collection. That the conversations that they were having about the F-35 and the Russian S-400 and all that, everything we fear the Turks would be able to do with their own S-400s and their own F-35 is being done already. Meaning, the Russians have the S-400. It's in Syria. What airplanes do you think we fly over Syria as part of our combat air patrol? F-35s, F-22s, everything. The Russians have airborne platforms, their own airplanes that are flying. These platforms have electronic warfare and radar capabilities. They're mapping out everything. They have mapped out everything about the F-35. Everything. There's nothing about the F-35 that they don't know about. They know what happens when the F-35 is flying slick, and then it opens up its doors, to bring out the ordnance that it's going to drop, the changes in the radar profile that take place, how to optimize your radar collection, both airborne and ground-based, and they've packaged this all in. The Syrians have it because they've been collecting. And you know who's working with the Syrians on air defense intimately? The Iranians. So the Iranians are collecting this, the Russians are collecting this, the Syrians are collecting it, but more importantly, the Russians and the Iranians are collecting this. This means that I can guarantee you, this is a speculation on my part, but it's informed speculation, that Russian and Iranian radar specialists have collaborated, shared their data, and they've come up with firing solutions for the F-35 using a variety of air defense systems. They can detect the F-35 early on. They can detect it in ways that the F-35 isn't aware that it's being detected. They can track it, and when they need to, they will shoot it down. And I believe, again, that the Iranians basically didn't want to shoot down the F-35 because that's an escalatory move. So what the Iranians did is everything but shoot it down, meaning that they locked on. You wouldn't lock on and hold lock, because that's an act of war, and not shoot it down unless you were just deliberately saying, I got you. It's like me putting a green dot on your head and one on your heart, and I say, or on your heart, and say, Garland, look down at your chest. You see that dot? You know what that means? Yeah. So you're already dead. I've just decided not to kill you. Why don't you get out of here? And off you go. I've let you live. This appears to be what the Iranians did here. The Iranians basically told the Israelis, we have you. You're dead already. You'd be dead if we wanted you dead. And we're touching you. This is where I need to talk to Alistair, because I don't know how to read his take. He implies that maybe the Israelis penetrated Iranian airspace with F-35s. I don't believe that happened. I believe that the Iranians were tagging the Israelis inside Iraqi airspace. And that's what really scared the Israelis, is that they were flying a profile that they believed was undetectable, designed to be undetectable so they could get to the weapons release point over Salahuddin without being detected. And instead, as they're heading towards weapons release, they're going, what the hell's going on? They got me. I'm dead. You've watched Top Gun, the radar thing, the tone. You're dead. Everybody, oh, I'm dead. I'm dead. You're dead. You're literally dead. It's over. And so that's what broke up the Israeli attack. But this is the kind of cooperation we're talking about when we speak of defense. It's not a one-way street. A lot of people keep saying that the Russians are going to provide the Iranians with X. Remember, it was the Iranians that helped school the Russians on drone warfare. And the Iranians now have certain capabilities too in ballistic missiles. The Iranians, unlike the Russians, have launched ballistic missile attacks against the most sophisticated Western anti-ballistic missile defense system there is. and defeated it. You know damn well the Russians are going, can we talk? Can we talk?
Look, I would bet this: when they had their command centers, there was people from other countries, maybe Russia, maybe China. You know what I mean? Consultants, people watching, whatever the case. All of this action wasn't just the Iranians. I'm not saying they didn't do it on their own and of their own, on their own design. I'm saying there were people around from other countries looking. There were allies working together to gather data and information and intelligence for how the West responded, what they were able to do, what they weren't. You know what I mean? That these were joint operations saying, let's feel them out. And that there were major, when I was in law enforcement, we had a big operation. We'd have like after action meetings where you shared everything what could have been. I will guarantee you this was not, to me, it wasn't really per se an offensive operation. It had the appearance of an offensive operation. But if it was an offensive operation, they would have destroyed everything they could have possibly destroyed. To me, it was an intelligence gathering. All of the Iranian attacks, as it were, on Israel, to me, had all the earmarks of intelligence gathering operations for multiple actors.
100%. In the intelligence game is a strange game, because there's layer upon. To give you an example, again, back in Iraq, we put together an intelligence collection plan to find specific aspects of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction programs. The key aspect to a intelligence collection plan is the questions you're asking, because the questions you're asking if the other side realizes it, tells them what you don't know, and what therefore you're looking for. Now, on the one hand, that allows them to hide it, but on the other hand, they have to go, oh, he's looking for this. Why don't I help him find it? Meaning, I'm going to start seeding things out there and all that stuff. So it's a very strange game. And the Israelis, they're not novices to this game. And the reason why there was a time when we were using what we call Kurdish intelligence to guide a large part of our work. It was done through Ahmad Chalabi's people, and I was always suspicious of it. But like an idiot, like most intelligence officers who are with their back against the wall, I need to know more. So I had a meeting with Ahmed Chalabi and the head of his intelligence, and I told them some of our information gaps, the things we were looking for. And lo and behold, we started finding it. I mean, we were getting intelligence, answering the question. What we didn't realize at the time is that Chalabi's organization was heavily infiltrated by the Iraqi Intelligence Service, and that the Iraqi Intelligence Service went around and said, well, if Ritter's looking for this, let's give Ritter what he wants to find. And I'm sitting there, we're getting stuff. Fortunately, I had some good people too, and I'm not that bad. And we were looking at, the story is when something's too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. And so we're looking at things going, nah, that can't. And we would test it, and it didn't pass the test. But I remember sitting down with my Iraqi counterpart one time, and he basically told me, he said, you were on some wild goose chases there for a while there, Mr. Ritter. I said, yeah. And he goes, how do you think that happened? I said, I know how it happened. And he said, how? And I said, you were throwing this stuff in there. He goes, yeah. But he says, now we learned everything we need to know about you. We learned how you operate. We've timed out everything. This is a silly game that we're playing. All this kind of stuff. But the reason I bring this up is that you're 100% correct. Nothing happens in a vacuum. This area of the world, there's so many games being played, intelligence games. So when the Israelis do something, they are operating at different levels. Believe me, when they attacked, it wasn't just to put a missile on target, but they were collecting on how the Iranians were operating. They were collecting to see if the Iranians had advanced notice. They were trying to collect if things are moving. We used to call it shake the tree, where we'd go in Iraq and do an inspection, but I'd have U-2 aircraft and helicopters and other resources out there because we were shaking the tree, and then we're seeing what moved, what happened, to gather more information. The Israelis were shaking the tree, and the Iranians know that the Israelis were shaking the tree, and so they're going to have things happening that have no relationship to reality, but they're designed to, to deceive and all this stuff. So it's the reason why I bring this up is I want to impart on people how hard it is to get good intelligence, how hard it is, because there's so many games being played, so much deception, so much, false moves and things of that nature. And it appears the Iranians played the game better than the Israelis. And knowing how good the Israelis are, that's a big accomplishment. All these people out there that treat the Iranians like they're second-class citizens, like they're wannabes and all this stuff. When it comes to this area of the world, especially, they're the A-team. Just ask the Israelis, because the Iranians are beating them hands down across the board right now, and the Israelis don't have a solution for it right now. The Israelis are obviously very good. They killed Hassan Nasrallah. Where'd they get the information about that? The pager thing. I mean, it's an act of terrorism. It's a crime, but you got to say it. That was clever. And they've put in their own people, and they're infiltrating it. But now, what happens? You become too addicted to sources of information, and after a while, you'll find out that the enemy has probably infiltrated your own source and is starting to feed you things that are leading you down the wrong path. And I think we're at the phase of this conflict right now where Israel's burned through their intelligence. Their sources have been compromised, and they're either flying blind or they're being misled. And the Iranians have achieved strategic, tactical, and operational control of the intelligence battlefield. And this isn't a good place for Israel to be. It's a very dangerous place for Israel to be.
And I think from the international geopolitical view, I think it's interesting that Russia signed this deal with North Korea, right? We're going to have you cover our back, we cover yours. There's signing something similar with Iran now, right? But a little bit different. Russia is doing these, what I would call military alignments. Like, it's a recognition that there's a full spectrum war on Russia and its allies. And so you've got a full spectrum defense mechanism, because let's not forget, they already got these massive economic deals signed with Iran. One of them is like a $40 billion deal where they're developing these gigantic oil. People forget Iran found like some of the biggest oil fields in the world, and Russia's now developing them for Iran. So there's an alignment, I think, that's a recognized. Here's the part I think of the part of that I think is of consequence: BRICS. That Russia realizes Iran, because of its location, because of its resources, because of its revolutionary kind of nature, they're never going to give in to the U.S. imperial monsters, that they're a critical part of BRICS and of multipolarity. And I think part of this is a recognition we got to defend them, because if the neocons are able to take out Iran, then BRICS is going to be highly compromised. And so I think part of this really uniting and defending and making it clear we're going to defend Iran is also a way of saying we're going to do what we got to do to defend our BRICS partners. In a way, it's like a security deal amongst BRICS countries without connecting it to BRICS.
Yeah, look, again, we throw the term BRICS around a lot. And, from our Western perspective, we're going, oh yeah, didn't Goldman Sachs come up with that idea sometime around, 2006, and then it happened. So yeah, we know all about BRICS because it's a Goldman Sachs initiative. Those Neanderthals in the third world, and the Russian cavemen and the Chinese cavemen, they can't come up with this themselves. This is a thing. Goldman Sachs may have come up with whatever they think BRICS is. BRICS is actually the direct descendant of the Bandung Conference of 1955. It's literally a continuation of the spirit of Bandung. 1955, of course, was when the the Chinese worked with the Indians. Amazing how that works out like that. In 1954, they came up with a concept of, the five principles, the five joint principles of, how the globe is going to peacefully interact, and not only that, how to defeat colonialism, because there, you still had colonial powers. So the Bandung Conference about the defeat of colonialism, and Zhou Enlai, the Chinese premier at the time, said in 20 years colonialism will be dead. He was right. But Bandung, the spirit of Bandung, couldn't survive the Cold War, and it became what was supposed to be, this group became known as the non-aligned movement, which is very powerful during the Cold War, but it never really grew into its own. And then what happened is, when the Cold War ended, this led to what we would call the neo-colonial period, not just of the former imperial powers, France with France Afrique, the British with the Commonwealth, but the United States with the rules-based international order. What we're looking at here is neo-colonialism. It's colonial-like domination of the world by powers that are no longer established imperial powers, but they operate as quasi-imperial powers through their neo-colonial application of their policies. BRICS is a counter to that. BRICS is the spirit of Bandung brought together to defeat neo-colonialism. That's what BRICS is all about. And we're missing the big picture here. We're everybody focused on the big story out of BRICS was Putin's no longer isolated. Well, he never was isolated. I mean, that's a myth put forward by the West, but Putin's no longer isolated, and BRICS proves it. If that's your thing, if you're focused on that aspect, you're not seeing the forest for the trees. We know that Putin's not isolated, but BRICS isn't about a process of taking Russian out of isolation. It's a process of what called the global South coming together, former non-aligned movement, to defeat neo-colonialism. That's it. They weren't successful in getting a BRICS currency. But if you think BRICS is about a currency, if you even think BRICS is about de-dollarization, it's not. That's the Goldman Sachs perspective. De-dollarization isn't because of BRICS. BRICS is compelled to consider de-dollarization because of the dollar. I mean, if you listen to what they were saying the whole time about, Putin, I mean, the guy, love him or not, I mean, I don't, that's your business. He's a genius. He is a geopolitical genius. And he said, it was never about Russia rejecting the dollar. We never rejected the dollar. It's about the dollar rejecting Russia. And therefore, everything we did was premised on that. And this is, I think this is what we have to start focusing in on, is the reality of BRICS. It is a process that isn't going to manifest itself in a day, in a week, in months, in years. This is going to be measured in decades. Just like Zhou Enlai said, the spirit of Bandung will take 20 years to manifest itself. He was right. The spirit of BRICS may take a decade before it actually gets off its feet. But what's happened is the promise of the non-aligned movement, the promise of the global South, has now been given infrastructure. It is now established. It is now real. There is a process now that exists for consensus-driven multilateralism that isn't directed by Russia and China. It's directed by the emerging global South. Russia and China, to show the maturity of the two, they're willing to subordinate themselves, not subordinate, but willing not to be seen as the dictators, but rather as participants, fellow participants. It's an extraordinarily mature way of approaching it. Why? Because when you have the economic strength of China or the military and diplomatic strength of Russia, if you say, I'm just a participant, all the participants are looking to you anyways for solutions. So you become the leader by default, but it's consensus driven. This is the mistake the United States has made. We feel that we have to dictate outcomes without understanding that if we simply led from a position of equality, that they would turn to us anyways for the solutions. But the difference is the solution that would be sought isn't one that we dictate and impose, but one that they want and desire because it's part of a consensus-driven approach. And that is, I think, the missing equation here is when we speak of BRICS, we speak of this new world order and stuff. We don't understand what BRICS is. BRICS is the end of neocolonialism. It's the end of American hegemony. It's not the end of America, and it's not the end of Europe. It's not the end of NATO. It's not the end of this. It's the end of processes that are derived from colonial principles, and it's a liberation of the global South that should have occurred decades ago, but didn't because of the Cold War.
I'll go one further. It's a liberation of America from the American people, from a tiny group of neocons and lunatics who are hurting us. The fact of the matter is, I had a guy on yesterday, Dr. Jack Rasmus, who's written a lot of books on this, and he gets into the numbers. And it's like he gets up to, I forgot what he had, like $16 trillion in basically tax cuts for corporations and the rich since 2020. He gets into, I forgot, it was another 8 trillion in buyouts for the bank, corporations, money from anyway, when he gets finished, he's up over $30 trillion in just money thrown away that could have helped the American people. And he's like, there goes the $38 trillion. And in 2020, I think he said our deficit was like 5.5 trillion or something. But bottom line is, he shows how much money was wasted, and all of that was wasted. And we really should still have the same deficit that we had in 2000, which is fairly healthy. My point being this: rather than fear that this is something that's going to drive us into poverty, I think it can create an environment where we can have a healthy country, where instead of all the money going to war and bases and buyouts and things like that, maybe perhaps when a town gets washed away by a stinking hurricane, we can afford to rebuild it, rebuild our schools, rebuild our infrastructure. So I think Americans should see it as a liberation from these lunatics who are robbing us blind. Scott Ritter. Oh, did you have a final comment?
No, I'm just, we talk about, the deindustrialization of America and this, that, and the other thing. Let's just look at global energy for a second. We want to dominate the global energy market because of course, it's the rules-based international order, and we want our foot on the gas pedal and all this kind of stuff. The countries that do deep water oil exploration, the best software, the best equipment out there in the world for managing oil fields is Western equipment. There's no country or there's no company that does this better than we do, which means that if we look at the Chinese approach, the Chinese come in and they say, I read something about this the other day. The Chinese solution to everything is build a road. Look what they're doing with the Taliban. Yes, the Taliban, they have horrible policies. What they're doing to women is just a crime against humanity. I mean, it's horrible. The United States policy is sanction, deny, and all we do is ensure that the women suffer more. The Chinese build a road. And that road now has potential. And then the Taliban go, oh, could you help us out with this oil production? Yep. Oil production. Could you help us out with this? Yep. And they built lithium mines, copper mines, all this kind of stuff. The Chinese just eliminated tariffs for Afghanistan, meaning that all the trade going forward, Afghanistan will pay no tariffs. It's just it's literally free trade. At no time have the Chinese said, these are the strings attached. But what's going to happen is the Taliban, for instance, said, we want to come to BRICS. And the consensus in BRICS was no. You can't come as long as you're treating your women this way. Now, the road's still there. We're doing business with you. And the Taliban is going, we have this great economic opportunity, but we can't do anything with it because the world's not recognized this, not doing. The change will come from within. What's going to happen in Afghanistan is eventually, and it may be generational, but I'm sorry for the current generation of Afghan women. Life sucks, and there's just no easy way to say this. Life sucks, and it's not gonna get any better. We're not going to go to war to save you. That isn't going to happen. And your solution isn't going to come with an American accent, because we've already proven we don't care about you. We had control of that area of the world for 20 years, and we never cared about you. We didn't do anything to help you, and we abandoned you at the end. The Chinese just built a road, and that road is going to turn into a paved road, and it's going to turn into infrastructure that's going to create huge potential. And the Taliban is eventually going to have to start to change their ways. And eventually you're going to see Afghanistan evolve into, let's say the Taliban, the emirate stays in power, evolve in a direction that Iran has evolved, that Saudi Arabia is trying to evolve to, where women aren't necessarily equal, but they're respected, they're educated, they become a contributing part of your society. You want them to be doctors, you want them to be lawyers, you want them to be engineers, you want them to be teachers, and that's how you're going to liberate the women of Afghanistan. It's going to be done with a Chinese accent. The Chinese built a road, Garland. We didn't. That's how this world's going to change. The Chinese solution, by doing things that aren't selfish, by doing things that are mutually beneficial, by having no expectations, but holding out high standards.
Well, I think Maverick's in the background making an announcement, and the announcement is, "Shut up, guys. I'm taking control of this operation."
Well, there we go.
So, all right, everybody go to scottritter.com for more information. Follow all of Scott's good work there at scottritter.com. Share this on all your social media platforms. There's a lot of banning going on. And of course, when you go to scottritter.com, make sure you donate. And Scott Ritter has a Substack too. Make sure you check out his Substack. Lots of good info there. Thanks a lot, Scott. And thanks a lot, everybody. Talk to you soon.